The dawn broke over Ouagadougou with the kind of light that makes everything look both beautiful and merciless at the same time. I stood there, my hands still gripping the steering wheel of the empty bus, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape my chest. The passenger seats stretched behind me in neat rows, 42 seats, all vacant, all silent. Just an hour ago, or at least what felt like an hour ago, every single one had been occupied. My name is Ibrahim Traoré, and I have been driving the night route between Bobo Dioulasso and Ouagadougou for 6 years. 6 years of watching the same landscape transform under moonlight. 6 years of listening to passengers sleep and snore and whisper prayers for safe journey. I knew this route like I knew the lines on my own palms. And yet, on this morning of November 14th, I found myself completely lost. The bus station was beginning to stir with early morning activity. I could see Amadou, the station manager, walking toward me with his characteristic limp, the result of a motorcycle accident years ago. His face, usually set in an expression of mild irritation, now showed genuine concern. He reached my window and peered inside, his eyes widening as they swept across the empty interior. "Ibrahim," he said, his voice careful, measured. "Where are your passengers?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words stuck in my throat like cotton. Where were my passengers? The question seemed so simple, so straightforward, and yet I had no answer that would make any sense to him or to myself. "I don't know," I finally managed. They were there, all of them, 42 people. And now, Amadou's face shifted from concern to something harder, more suspicious. He was a practical man who had worked in transportation for 30 years, and practical men do not believe in vanishing passengers. "Come down from there," he ordered. "We need to check the bus." I climbed down on shaking legs. The morning heat was already building, and sweat had begun to soak through my shirt. Together we walked the length of the bus, checking every seat, every overhead compartment, even the small bathroom at the back. Nothing. Not a single piece of luggage, not a forgotten phone or bottle of water. It was as if no one had ever been there at all. "The manifest," Amadou said suddenly. "Show me the manifest." My hands fumbled through my leather satchel, pulling out the crumpled passenger list. There it was, 42 names, all checked off, all paid and accounted for. My handwriting stared back at me from the page: Kofi Ouedraogo, Mariam Sankara, Yaya Compaoré, and 39 others. Real people with real names, real destinations, real lives. Amadou studied the list, his frown deepening with each name. "But you checked them all in yourself?" he asked. I nodded. The memory was vivid, each face and each boarding pass, each piece of luggage stored beneath the bus. There had been an elderly woman with 3 chickens in a wooden crate, a young student heading to university, a merchant with fabric samples, a mother with 2 small children who had fallen asleep before we even left Bobo Dioulasso. "This is not possible," Amadou said, but his voice wavered slightly. "People do not simply disappear from a moving bus, but they had, somehow, impossibly, they had." Chapter 2. The police arrived within the hour, 2 officers in rumpled uniforms, their faces showing that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from dealing with too many problems and too few solutions. The senior officer, Captain Sawadogo, was a heavy-set man with grey threading through his short hair. His partner, a younger man named Zerbo, carried a worn notebook and kept glancing at me like I might bolt at any moment. "Tell us exactly what happened," Captain Sawadogo said, settling his bulk onto one of the empty bus seats. "From the beginning." I took a breath, trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent. The station had filled with onlookers now. Other drivers and station workers, early morning travelers all gathering to witness this impossible situation. "We departed Bobo Dioulasso at 10:30 last night," I began. "Right on schedule. I had checked in all 42 passengers myself. Everything was normal, the weather was good, the bus was running well." Captain Sawadogo gestured for me to continue. "We made our usual stop in Boromo around midnight. Some passengers got off to stretch their legs, buy food from the vendors. Everyone got back on. I counted them, 42 people. The memory of that stop was crystal clear. I could still see the night market vendors with their grilled meat and fried plantains, the glow of kerosene lamps, the sound of Dioula and Moure conversations mixing in the air. After Boromo, we continued toward Ouagadougou. The road was empty, just us and the darkness. I remember checking my watch around 1:30 in the morning. We were making good time. This was where the memory became difficult, slippery. I paused, rubbing my temples. And then, Captain Sourdogo prompted. And then, I cannot remember clearly. The road was straight. The night was dark. I remember feeling very tired suddenly, which was unusual because I'm accustomed to night driving. My eyes felt heavy. Officer Zerbo stopped writing and looked up. "You fell asleep at the wheel." "No," I said quickly. I pulled over. I remember thinking I needed to rest for just a moment, just to clear my head. The next thing I knew, it was dawn, and I was parked here at the station, and the bus was empty. Captain Sourdogo exchanged a look with his partner. "You drove from somewhere near Boromo to Ouagadougou with no memory of the journey?" he asked. When he put it that way, it sounded insane, but that was exactly what had happened. "The passengers must have gotten off somewhere," Officer Zerbo suggested. "Perhaps there was another stop you do not remember." But that made no sense either. Why would all 42 passengers disembark in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, taking all their belongings with them? "We need to drive the route," Captain Sourdogo decided. "Retrace your path. Perhaps we will find some explanation." As they prepared to accompany me back along the route, I noticed Amadou speaking quietly with the station owner, Monsieur Bonkungu. Both men kept glancing in my direction, their expressions troubled. I knew what they were thinking, the same thing everyone was thinking, that I had done something terrible, that I was lying, that I was crazy. Chapter 3. We set out in Captain Sourdogo's police vehicle at 8 in the morning, the sun already beating down mercilessly on the red earth. I sat in the back seat, feeling like a criminal even though I had not been arrested. Officer Zerbo drove, while Captain Sourdogo studied the route map and my passenger manifest. The highway between Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso was familiar territory, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through savanna and scrubland. During the day, it was busy with trucks, buses, motorcycles, and the occasional herd of cattle being driven to market. But at night, especially after midnight, it became a different world entirely, isolated, vast, and very dark. "How many times have you driven this route?" Captain Sourdogo asked. "Hundreds," I replied. "At least 3 times per week for 6 years, and nothing like this has ever happened before. Never. Sometimes there are delays, mechanical problems, occasionally a passenger gets sick, but nothing like this." We passed through several small villages, and at each one, Captain Sourdogo insisted we stop and ask questions. Had anyone seen the bus? Had anyone noticed anything unusual the previous night? The answers were always the same. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. By the time we reached Boromo, it was nearly 11 in the morning. The town was alive with market day activity, completely different from the quiet midnight stop I remembered. We found the spot where the bus had parked, where the vendors had been selling their food. Captain Sourdogo questioned several people who worked the night market. Yes, they remembered the bus. Yes, they remembered the passengers, the woman with chickens, the university student, the mother with children. Everyone had gotten back on the bus. Everyone had continued toward Ouagadougou. This confirmation should have helped, but instead, it made everything worse. The passengers had been real. They had existed. They had boarded the bus in Boromo and then vanished into the night somewhere between there and the capital. "Show me exactly where you pulled over to rest," Captain Sourdogo instructed as we continued along the route. This was the difficult part. I strained my memory, trying to recall the exact location. The highway looked different in daylight, and yet there was something familiar about a certain section, about 30 kilometers past Boromo. The road straightened out, flanked by acacia trees on one side and open savanna on the other. "Here," I said suddenly. "I think it was here." Officer Zerbo pulled the vehicle to the side of the road. We all got out, and immediately I felt a strange sensation, a prickling at the back of my neck, a sense of recognition mixed with unease. This was the place. I was certain of it. Captain Sourdogo walked slowly along the shoulder of the road, his eyes scanning the ground. Officer Zerbo did the same on the opposite side. I stood by the vehicle, my heart racing for reasons I could not quite explain. "Captain," Officer Zerbo called out, "look at this." We hurried over to where he stood, pointing at the red earth just beyond the road's edge. There were tire tracks, fresh ones, leading off the highway and into the scrubland. They matched the size and pattern of a bus. Chapter 4. The tire tracks led us away from the highway, cutting through sparse grass and red dirt, heading toward a cluster of acacia trees about 200 meters from the road. My stomach twisted as we followed them on foot, Captain Sawadogo in the lead, one hand resting on his service pistol. "Why would you drive off the road here?" Officer Zerbo asked, but I had no answer. I did not remember driving off the road at all. The morning sun beat down on us as we walked, grasshoppers scattering before our feet. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of the highway, trucks passing, a distant horn. Everything felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. We found the bus tracks circling around near the acacia trees, then leading back toward the highway. But there was something else. Footprints, many footprints, scattered and confused, as if people had milled around in this area. And then something that made my blood run cold. A child's sandal, small and pink, lying discarded in the dust. Captain Sawadogo picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands. I recognized it immediately. The little girl, maybe 5 years old, who had been traveling with her mother. She had been wearing pink sandals decorated with tiny flowers. "You remember this?" the captain asked, watching my face. I nodded, unable to speak. Officer Zerbo was examining the ground more carefully now, moving in widening circles from where we stood. He stopped suddenly, his body going rigid. "Captain, you need to see this." We rushed over to where he stood, and I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. There, partially hidden by brush, was a shallow depression in the earth. Recently disturbed soil, lighter in color than the surrounding ground. And another one, a few meters away, and another. "Get shovels," Captain Sawadogo said quietly. "Call for backup." "And Ibrahim Mason," he turned to me, his face hard. "You need to tell me the truth right now. What happened to those people?" "I do not know." The words burst from me in anguish. "I swear to God, I do not know. I cannot remember." But even as I said it, something was shifting in my mind. Fragments of memory trying to surface, images that made no sense. The sound of screaming, the smell of diesel fuel, the sensation of the bus swerving violently. I stumbled backward, my hands going to my head. Captain Sawadogo grabbed my arm, steadying me. "What do you remember?" he demanded. "Tell me." "There was something in the road," I gasped. "I remember now. There was something blocking the road. I had to swerve. The bus went off the highway." The memory was coming back in flashes, brutal and disjointed. The passengers screaming, the bus tilting, the terrible sound of metal scraping against earth. And then what? What had happened next? Within 30 minutes, the area was swarming with police vehicles. More officers arrived, along with a team from the Regional Investigation Unit. They brought shovels, cameras, evidence bags. Captain Sawadogo had me sit in the back of a police car while they worked, Officer Zerbo standing guard nearby. I watched them dig, watched the red earth yield its secrets, watched Captain Sawadogo's face grow graver with each passing moment. Chapter 5. They found the first body just after noon. An elderly man, still wearing the same traditional bubu I remembered from when he boarded in Bobo Dioulasso. They found him buried in one of the shallow graves, his face peaceful, as if he were simply sleeping beneath the earth. I vomited onto the red dirt, my entire body shaking. Officer Zerbo offered me water, but his kindness was now mixed with suspicion, with horror at what we were uncovering. By sunset, they had found 12 bodies. By the next morning, 28. The excavation continued for 3 days, and each discovery was like a knife to my heart. The woman with the chickens, the university student, the mother and her 2 children, buried together. 42 people in total, exactly matching my manifest, all found in shallow graves around those acacia trees. I was arrested, of course, taken to the police station in Ouagadougou, questioned for hours, then days. But my story never changed because I genuinely could not remember what had happened. The last clear memory I had was pulling the bus over because I felt tired. Everything else was a void, a black hole where hours of my life should have been. The investigation revealed facts that seemed impossible to reconcile. The medical examiner determined that all 42 passengers had died from a combination of blunt force trauma and asphyxiation, consistent with being in a severe vehicle accident. But there was no damaged bus. The vehicle I had driven to the station that morning was pristine, unmarked, with no signs of any collision. Perhaps there was another bus, one investigator suggested. Perhaps you switched vehicles. But the tire tracks told a different story. They matched my bus exactly, and the position of the bodies suggested they had all been in the same vehicle at the time of death. My lawyer, a weary man named Traoré, who took my case because he was assigned to it, sat across from me in the interrogation room on the fourth day. "Ibrahim," he said, his voice gentle, "I need you to understand your situation. The evidence suggests you drove your bus off the road, killing all 42 passengers. Then, somehow, you buried them and drove the bus back to the station. The prosecutor will argue premeditation. They will say you planned this." "But why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would I kill 42 innocent people? What possible reason could I have?" This was the question that tormented everyone. There was no motive. I had no connection to any of the victims beyond our brief interaction on that fatal night. I had no history of violence, no psychological problems, no debts or grudges. By every measure, I was exactly what I appeared to be, an ordinary bus driver who had somehow committed an extraordinary atrocity, and yet I could not remember doing it. Chapter 6. The trial began 3 months later. The courtroom in Ouagadougou was packed every day. Journalists, curious onlookers, and most painfully, the families of the victims. I saw their faces each morning as I was led in wearing handcuffs. Their grief was a living thing, filling the room, crushing me beneath its weight. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. They presented the tire track evidence, the bodies, the manifest with my handwriting, security footage showing me driving away from Boromo with a full bus and arriving in Ouagadougou alone. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about the physical impossibility of the crime. How could one man bury 42 bodies in a single night? How could the bus show no damage when the passengers clearly died in a severe accident? These questions had no good answers, which somehow made me seem even more guilty, more monstrous. My lawyer argued diminished capacity. He brought in psychologists who testified about dissociative states, about how trauma could cause the mind to fracture and hide memories. He suggested that perhaps I had witnessed something so terrible that night that my mind had broken rather than process it. But witnessed what? If I had not been the perpetrator, then who had killed all those people? On the 6th day of testimony, something unexpected happened. A witness came forward, a truck driver named Traoré, who had been traveling the same route that night. He testified that he had seen my bus pulled over near the acacia trees around 2 in the morning. "I slowed down to see if there was a problem," Issoufou said from the witness stand. The bus was stopped, but there were no lights on inside. I thought perhaps the driver was resting. I continued on my way. "Did you see anyone around the bus?" the prosecutor asked. Issoufou hesitated, his eyes flickering toward me. I thought I saw people standing near the trees, several people, but it was dark, and I was tired. I convinced myself I had imagined it. This testimony sent a murmur through the courtroom. People near the trees? Could there have been others involved? But when pressed, Issoufou could provide no other details. He had not stopped, had not reported what he saw. In the harsh light of the courtroom, his testimony seemed insubstantial, easily explained away as shadows and tricks of exhausted eyes. The families of the victims testified. Each one stood before the court and spoke of the person they had lost. Mariam Sankara, the university student, whose mother wept as she described her daughter's dreams of becoming a doctor. Yaya Compaoré, the merchant, whose wife was now raising their 5 children alone. The elderly woman's son, who said his mother had been traveling to visit her sick sister for what would have been the last time. I listened to each testimony, and with each one I felt pieces of myself dying. These were not abstract victims. They were real people with real lives, now extinguished, and somehow, impossibly, I was responsible. Chapter 7. At night, alone in my cell, the memories began to return. Not all at once, but in fragments, like pieces of broken glass slowly being fitted back together into a terrible picture. I remembered the road. I remembered feeling tired, pulling over to rest. But then there was something else. A sound. No, not a sound. A smell, bitter and chemical. It had filled the bus suddenly, and I had felt my consciousness slipping away even as I tried to understand what was happening. When I woke, and I did wake, I was certain of this now. The bus was still running, but I was not in the driver's seat. I was slumped against the window. my head throbbing, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. Through blurred vision, I saw figures moving through the bus, men in dark clothing, their faces covered. They were carrying the passengers out, one by one. The passengers were not moving, not fighting. They were limp, unconscious, or worse. I tried to move, tried to cry out, but my body would not obey. Whatever they had used to gas the bus had affected me too, though not as severely. Perhaps because I had felt it coming and had tried to hold my breath. Perhaps because I was younger, stronger than most of the passengers. I watched, helpless, as they emptied the bus. Watched as they carried bodies into the darkness beyond the acacia trees, and then one of them came to me, a tall man with cold eyes above his face covering. He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought he would kill me too. Instead, he injected something into my arm. The last thing I remembered before darkness took me completely was his voice, speaking in French. "You will not remember this. When you wake, you will remember nothing." The memory hit me like a physical blow. I gasped, sitting up on my thin prison mattress, my heart hammering. They had drugged me. Someone had deliberately gassed the bus, killed the passengers, and then made me forget. But who and why? I called for the guard immediately, demanded to speak with my lawyer, with Captain Sawadogo, with anyone who would listen. When Ouedraogo finally came to see me the next morning, I poured out the recovered memory in a rush of words. He listened, his face grave, taking notes. "Ibrahim, do you understand how this sounds?" he asked when I finished. "You are now claiming that mysterious men in masks gassed your bus, killed all the passengers, and then drugged you to forget. The prosecutor will say this is a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. But it is the truth. I remember now. There was a chemical smell. There were men. There was an injection. Do you have any proof? Any evidence beyond a recovered memory that conveniently appears months after your arrest?" I did not. I had nothing but the memory itself, vivid and terrible, yet as insubstantial as smoke. "We can request toxicology testing," Ouedraogo said slowly. "They took blood samples when you were arrested. Perhaps there are still traces of whatever drug they used. But we both knew that months had passed. Whatever substance had been in my system was long gone by now. Still, my lawyer filed the motion, and to everyone's surprise, Captain Sawadogo agreed to review the case with fresh eyes. Chapter 8. Captain Sawadogo came to interview me personally, bringing Officer Zerbo with him. We sat in a small interrogation room, the tape recorder spinning between us. "Tell me everything you remember," he said. "Every detail, no matter how small." I did, recounting the recovered memory as precisely as I could. The captain listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The toxicology reports from your arrest," he finally said. "They showed traces of a sedative in your system. At the time, we assumed you had taken it yourself, perhaps to calm your nerves or to help you sleep. But the compound was unusual, not something typically available in Burkina Faso." My heart leaped. "You see, it proves you had a sedative in your system. It does not prove your story about masked men." But his tone was thoughtful now, less certain. "There is something else," Officer Zerbo added. "We have been investigating the victims' backgrounds as part of standard procedure. Most were ordinary people, as you described, but 3 of them had interesting connections." He pulled out a file, laying photographs on the table. Kofi Ouedraogo, the merchant. He was not just selling fabric. He was also a courier for a network that moved documents and messages across West Africa, mostly legitimate business, but he had connections to various political groups. The next photograph showed a middle-aged woman I vaguely remembered boarding in Bobo Dioulasso, Aminata Diallo, traveling as a teacher. In fact, she worked for a French NGO that has been investigating corruption in regional mining contracts. She had recently uncovered evidence of illegal gold mining operations with connections to organized crime. The third photograph was of the university student, young Mariam Sankara. Her uncle is Umaru Sankara, a journalist who has been writing exposés about human trafficking routes through the Sahel. Mariam had been helping him research his articles. I stared at the photographs, my mind racing. I was saying these people were targeted, that someone wanted them dead. "I'm saying," Captain Sawadogo replied carefully, "that 3 passengers on your bus had connections to activities that certain people might want to silence. The other 39 might have been unfortunate witnesses. The room felt suddenly cold despite the afternoon heat. But who? I asked. Who has the resources to organize something like this? The captain and officer exchanged glances. There are organizations, Captain Sawadogo said slowly. Criminal networks that move gold, weapons, even people across borders. They have money, connections, reach. If someone wanted to eliminate these three individuals without drawing attention to them specifically, killing all 42 passengers and making it look like a random massacre would be an effective method. And making me the killer, I added bitterly. Or making you the witness who could not testify because you could not remember. This opened up an entirely new dimension to the case. My lawyer immediately filed for a stay of the trial, arguing that new evidence suggested organized criminal involvement. The prosecutor objected strenuously, calling it a conspiracy theory with no basis in fact. Chapter 9. The judge granted a 2-week delay for further investigation. During that time, Captain Sawadogo worked tirelessly, following leads that grew from the connections he had identified. Officer Zerbo traveled to Bobo Dioulasso to interview people who had seen the passengers before they boarded the bus. What they discovered began to paint a disturbing picture. Aminata Diallo, the NGO worker, had been scheduled to testify before a regional commission about illegal mining operations the following week. Her testimony could have exposed corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. Kofi Uedraogo had been carrying documents that night, sealed envelopes he was delivering to contacts in Ouagadougou. His widow had no idea what was in them, but she said he had seemed nervous before the trip, more careful than usual. Mariam Sankara had been traveling with a flash drive containing her uncle's research, interviews with trafficking victims, photographs of suspect locations, financial records. The flash drive had never been found, not among her belongings, not buried with her body. Someone knew, Captain Sawadogo said when he briefed me on the findings. Someone knew exactly who was on that bus and what they were carrying. But how? The passenger list was not public until after departure. The manifest is filed electronically when passengers book their tickets, Officer Zerbo explained. Someone with access to the booking system could have known days in advance who would be on that bus. This led them to investigate the bus company itself. What they found shocked everyone. The company's computer system had been accessed remotely 3 days before my fatal journey. Someone had downloaded the passenger manifest for my route, along with manifests for several other routes that week. The IT specialist they brought in testified that the access had come from an IP address traced to a location in Togo, routed through multiple proxies to hide its origin. This was not amateur work. This was sophisticated, professional infiltration. My lawyer presented all of this evidence to the court. The prosecutor fought back, arguing that it was circumstantial, that it did not prove I was innocent, only that there might have been other interested parties. But doubt had been planted. The judge agreed to allow independent investigators to examine the crime scene again and to interview witnesses who might have information about organized criminal activity in the region. It was during this investigation that they found the second burial site. A farmer, having heard about the case, came forward to report something strange he had seen months earlier. About a kilometer from where my bus had stopped, he had noticed disturbed earth near an old baobab tree. He had assumed it was nothing, perhaps an animal's den, but given everything that had emerged, he thought it should be checked. They found 4 bodies there. All men, all killed execution style with single gunshots to the head. The bodies had been there longer than the bus passengers, at least 2 months before that fatal night, and all 4 men were identified as members of a criminal organization known to operate in the region, dealing in smuggled goods and army, according to intelligence reports. Contract killings. Taistis, Chapter 10. The discovery of the 4 executed criminals changed everything. Captain Sawadogo developed a theory, piecing together fragments of intelligence from multiple sources. The organization these men belonged to had been hired to eliminate the 3 targets on my bus, but something had gone wrong. Perhaps there had been a dispute about payment. Perhaps the men had tried to blackmail their employers. Perhaps they had simply known too much. So they themselves had been eliminated, buried in the desert, their deaths meant to silence them permanently. But the contract still needed to be fulfilled, so someone else had taken over, professionals, possibly foreign operatives with experience in this kind of work. They had planned it meticulously: gas the bus, eliminate all witnesses, bury the bodies, and leave the confused driver as the only suspect. A perfect crime. Except I had partially resisted the drug. Except I had seen something, even if I had forgotten it for months. Except Captain Sourdough had been thorough enough to keep investigating, even when the case seemed closed. The trial resumed with this new evidence. The courtroom atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The media now portrayed me not as a monster, but as a victim, the sole survivor of a massacre orchestrated by shadowy criminals. Expert witnesses testified about the drug found in my system, about how certain compounds could induce temporary amnesia. Military consultants, speaking anonymously, confirmed that the method used to kill the passengers was consistent with techniques used by professional assassination teams. The prosecutor's case began to crumble. Without the assumption that I had acted alone, the physical evidence made no sense. How could one man bury 42 bodies in a few hours? How could the bus show no damage if there had been a fatal accident? The answers that seemed impossible under the original theory became plausible when you considered a team of trained operatives working methodically through the night. But proving my innocence was not the same as proving who was actually guilty. The trail went cold at the computer intrusion. The 4 executed criminals could not testify about who had hired them. The investigation into Aminata Diallo's mining corruption case and Umaru Sankara's trafficking research revealed powerful enemies, but no concrete proof linking anyone to the bus massacre. On the final day of testimony, Umaru Sankara himself took the stand. The journalist was a small, intense man with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "My niece Mariam was my research assistant," he said, his voice steady despite the grief evident in his face. "She was brilliant, compassionate, determined to expose the truth about the trafficking networks that plague our region. She died because someone wanted to silence that truth. Ibrahim Traoré did not kill her. He is as much a victim as she was." He turned to address the courtroom directly. "White, there are people in this country, in this region, who profit from misery, who traffic in human beings, who steal our natural resources, who kill anyone who threatens their operations. They have money and power and connections that reach into the highest levels of government and business. My niece's death, and the deaths of 41 other innocent people, is on their hands. Not on the hands of this broken young man who was simply trying to do his job." The impact of his words was profound. When the judge called for closing arguments the next day, even the prosecutor seemed half-hearted in his presentation. Chapter 11. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 1 year after that terrible night. I stood in the courtroom, my hands gripping the railing in front of me, as the judge read out the decision, not guilty. The words should have brought relief, joy, vindication. Instead, I felt only a profound emptiness. I was free, but 42 people were still dead. I was innocent, but their real killers would likely never face justice. The families of the victims had mixed reactions. Some embraced me, thanking me for surviving, for helping to uncover the truth about what had really happened to their loved ones. Others turned away, unable to separate me from the tragedy, even knowing I was not responsible. I understood. In their place, I would have felt the same. Captain Sourdough shook my hand outside the courthouse. "What will you do now?" he asked. I had been thinking about that question for months. I could not go back to driving. Even the thought of sitting behind the wheel of a bus filled me with paralyzing anxiety, but I also could not simply walk away. "I am going to help," I said. "Umaru Sankara's research, Aminata Diallo's investigation. Someone needs to continue that work. Someone needs to make sure those deaths meant something." The captain nodded slowly. "That will be dangerous." "I know, and I did know, but I had already been through the worst thing I could imagine. I had been blamed for a massacre I did not commit, had lived with the weight of 42 deaths on my conscience, had recovered memories of horror that would haunt me forever. What more could they do to me? Over the following months, I worked with Umaru Sankara, helping him research and document the trafficking networks and corruption that had ultimately led to the massacre. We published articles, gave interviews, testified before regional commissions. Some of it led to prosecutions and reforms. Most of it seemed to disappear into the vast machinery of institutional indifference. But we kept going. Because Mariam Sankara had been right, the truth mattered. Because Aminata Diallo had been right, corruption needed to be exposed. Because all 42 people on that bus had deserved better than to be erased, forgotten, their deaths serving the interests of criminals. I moved to a small apartment in Ouagadougou, simple but comfortable. Sometimes, late at night, I would still wake up from nightmares, the smell of chemical gas, the sound of bodies being dragged across red earth, the cold eyes of the man who had injected me with amnesia. But I would get up, make tea, and continue working on whatever investigation we were pursuing. Captain Sawadogo continued to investigate too, though officially the case was closed. He followed leads about the criminal organization, about the computer intrusion, about the foreign operatives. Occasionally he would call me with updates, a suspect identified, a connection traced, a witness coming forward, but the trail never led anywhere conclusive. The people responsible were too well protected, too well connected, operating in shadows that official investigations could not quite penetrate. Chapter 12. 2 years after the massacre, on the anniversary of that terrible night, I traveled back to the acacia trees where the bodies had been found. A memorial had been erected there, a simple stone monument listing all 42 names. Families had placed photographs, flowers, small personal items around its base. I stood there in the afternoon heat, reading each name, remembering each face from that final boarding in Bobo Dioulasso, the elderly woman with her chickens, the young student with dreams of medical school, the mother and her 2 small children, the merchant with his sealed envelopes, all of them immortalized in stone now, their stories ended too soon. So I thought I would find you here. I turned to see Umaru Sankara approaching, his face weathered by 2 years of grief and relentless work. I come here sometimes, I admitted, to remember, to remind myself why we do this work. He nodded, standing beside me to look at the memorial. We made some progress this year, he said. 3 trafficking rings shut down, 2 mining operations exposed and sanctioned, several corrupt officials removed from office. It is not enough. No, it will never be enough to bring them back. But it is something. It matters. We stood in silence for a while, listening to the wind in the acacia trees, the distant sound of the highway where life continued, indifferent to the tragedy that had occurred here. The research Mariam was helping me with, Umaru said eventually. She had found something I did not tell the court about. Names, specific names of people she believed were at the center of the trafficking network. She had been planning to turn that information over to international investigators. He pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket. I have continued her work. I have confirmed many of her findings, and I have added more names, more evidence. But Ibrahim, this goes deeper than we imagined. There are government ministers, business leaders, even international diplomats involved. Publishing this could be the end of both of us. I thought about the easy path. Walk away, live a quiet life, let someone else fight these battles. I thought about the fear I would feel putting this information into the world, knowing it would paint a target on my back. Then I thought about 42 people who would never have the choice to walk away, to live quietly, to fear anything again. When do we publish? I asked. Umaru smiled grimly. Next week. I have arranged for simultaneous publication in 6 different countries. If they want to stop it, they will have to silence all of us. The report, when it came out, caused exactly the earthquake we expected. Arrests, resignations, international investigations, and threats, anonymous calls, messages warning us to stop, strange cars following us through the streets of Ouagadougou. Captain Sawadogo assigned protective details, though we all knew that if someone truly wanted us dead, there was only so much protection could do. But we had learned something from that night 2 years ago. We had learned that some evils thrive in darkness, that silence serves the powerful, that the worst thing we could do was nothing. I still cannot drive a bus. The nightmares still come. The memories of that night, both the ones I lost and the ones I recovered, will never fully leave me. I carry 42 names with me wherever I go, 42 faces, 42 lives that ended because they threatened someone's profitable darkness. But I also carry their legacy, Mariam's determination to expose the truth, Aminata's courage to investigate corruption, Kofi's networks of connection and communication, all 42 of them living on in the work we continue. Some nights, when the work feels overwhelming and the threats feel very real, I return to the memorial under the acacia trees. I read the names again. I remember. And I find the strength to continue. Because that is what survivors do. We remember. We bear witness. We fight for justice even when it seems impossible. We honor the dead by refusing to let their deaths be meaningless. The empty bus that arrived at dawn carried a terrible secret, but that secret, once exposed, became something more, a call to action, a reminder that ordinary people doing ordinary jobs can find themselves at the intersection of great evils, and that what we do in those moments defines not just our own lives, but the possibility of justice itself. I am Ibrahim Traoré. I am the driver of the empty bus, and I am still here, still fighting, still remembering. For 42 people who cannot fight, cannot remember, cannot be here themselves, their story is my story now, and I will tell it until the day I die, until everyone knows what happened under the acacia trees, until the powerful people who thought they could murder with impunity understand that even the smallest voice, even the most broken witness, can still speak truth. The empty bus arrived at dawn. But from that emptiness, from that terrible silence, a chorus of voices emerged, and we will not be silenced. Epilogue. 5 years have passed since the morning I drove an empty bus into Ouagadougou station. 5 years since my life split into 2 distinct parts, before that night, and everything that came after. I am sitting now in a small office in downtown Ouagadougou, surrounded by filing cabinets filled with documentation, photographs pinned to walls showing connections between people and organizations, maps marked with trafficking routes and mining operations. This room has become the headquarters of the Sankara Foundation for Justice and Transparency, named in honor of Mariam and her uncle Umaru, who passed away last year from a heart attack. Some say it was natural causes. Others whisper that the stress of fighting such powerful enemies finally took its toll. The foundation continues the work we started together. We have a staff of 12 now, journalists, researchers, former police officers, and survivors of trafficking who turned their trauma into determination. Every day, we receive tips, witness testimonies, documents leaked by conscience-stricken officials. Every day we push forward, exposing corruption, supporting prosecutions, giving voice to the voiceless. Captain Sawadogo retired from the police force 2 years ago, but he still consults with us regularly. His official investigation into the bus massacre remains technically open, though we all know it will never be formally solved. The people responsible operate at levels where accountability rarely reaches, but his unofficial investigation, conducted through our foundation, has yielded remarkable results. 17 trafficking networks disrupted, 8 corruption cases that led to high-level prosecutions, countless lives saved or changed by the information we have brought to light. Officer Zerbo now runs the Foundation's security operations. After what happened to the bus passengers, he became convinced that organized crime in West Africa required a coordinated civil society response. He brings his law enforcement expertise to protecting our investigators and witnesses, a job that has become increasingly dangerous as our work has expanded. The memorial under the acacia trees has grown over the years. What began as a simple stone monument is now a small park, maintained by the families of the victims. School groups visit to learn about corruption and violence. Activists hold vigils there. It has become a symbol of loss, yes, but also of resistance, of the refusal to let evil actions be forgotten or normalized. I visit on the anniversary every year without fail. This year, as I stood reading the names I have long since memorized, I was joined by someone unexpected, the daughter of Aminata Diallo, now a university student herself, studying journalism and human rights law. "I'm going to continue what my mother started," she told me, her voice fierce and certain. "And what you and Mr. Sankara continued. This work does not end." Looking at her, I saw Mariam Sankara, the same determination, the same brilliant fire, and I understood that this is how we truly honor the dead, not just by remembering them, but by ensuring that their values, their missions, their fights continue through new generations. The nightmares still come, though less frequently now. When they do, I have learned to sit with them rather than fight them. I let myself remember that night, the chemical smell, the helplessness, the horror of watching people die and being unable to stop it. I let myself feel the weight of it, because forgetting would be a betrayal. The 42 deserve to be remembered, even when remembering hurts. My relationship with the families of the victims has evolved in complex ways. Some have become close friends and collaborators in the Foundation's work. Others keep their distance, and I respect that. A few still cannot separate me from that terrible night, despite the verdict, despite everything we learned. I understand their pain is too great, their loss too profound. I do not take it personally. Grief has its own logic, its own timeline. Last month, we received credible intelligence about a planned attack on one of our investigators. Officer Zerbo's security protocols saved her life. She was moved to a safe location just hours before armed men broke into her apartment. The incident made international news, brought renewed attention to our work, and resulted in additional security support from international human rights organizations. But it also reminded us of the stakes. These are not abstract battles fought in courtrooms and newspapers. These are fights against people who kill without hesitation, who view human life as expendable when it threatens their profits. Every document we publish, every witness we protect, every connection we expose puts us at risk. Sometimes I wonder if it is worth it. If 42 deaths, and the ongoing danger to everyone involved in seeking justice for them, is too high a price. If perhaps the powerful are simply too powerful, the systems too entrenched, the corruption too deep, then I think about the mother we helped reunite with her trafficked daughter last month. The community that got clean water after we exposed the mining company that had been poisoning their wells. The 12 women who escaped a trafficking ring because someone saw our public awareness campaign and reported suspicious activity. The corrupt official now serving a prison sentence instead of stealing from his own people. Each of these victories is small. None of them brings back the 42. But together, they represent something larger. The possibility that ordinary people, armed with truth and determination, can create change even in systems designed to prevent it. The foundation has expanded beyond our original focus. We now work on environmental justice, labor rights, police accountability. We train citizen journalists in rural areas. We provide legal support to whistleblowers. We have partnerships with organizations across West Africa and beyond. What began as a response to one terrible tragedy has grown into a broader movement for transparency and justice. I never did return to driving. Even now, getting into any vehicle as a driver triggers anxiety. But I have found other ways to move forward, to help people reach their destinations. Instead of transporting bodies across physical distances, I help transport information across barriers of power and secrecy. Instead of following predetermined routes, I help map new paths toward accountability. The university in Ouagadougou invited me to give a lecture last semester, bearing witness, individual trauma and collective justice. Standing before those students, many of them Mariam's age when she died, I told them the complete story, not just the massacre and the trial, but what came after. The slow, difficult work of turning tragedy into purpose, the daily choice to keep fighting when it would be easier to give up. You will face injustice, I told them. You will encounter corruption, violence, systems that seem immovable. You may be tempted to think that one person cannot make a difference, that the powerful always win, that speaking truth is futile. But I am here because 42 people died, and their deaths could have meant nothing. Instead, those deaths exposed networks that had operated with impunity for years. They sparked investigations that continue to this day. They created space for change that is still unfolding. After the lecture, a young woman approached me. She was studying public administration and wanted to focus on anti-corruption measures. "How do you keep going?" she asked. "After everything you have been through, how do you find the strength?" I thought about that question for a long moment before answering. I keep going because stopping would mean their deaths were truly meaningless. I keep going because every time we expose corruption or save someone from trafficking, we prove that the powerful are not invincible. I keep going because on that terrible night, I survived when 42 others did not, and I owe it to them to use that survival for something that matters. The truth is more complicated, of course. Some days I keep going because I have momentum and purpose. Other days I keep going simply because I do not know what else to do. The work has become who I am. Ibrahim Traoré, survivor, witness, activist. Without it, I am not sure who I would be. Captain Sawadogo and I had coffee last week, as we do most weeks. He is older now, the stress of his career written in the lines of his face, but his mind is as sharp as ever. "Sir, do you have regrets?" he asked me, "about the path you chose after the trial?" I considered the question honestly. The threats, the danger, the exhaustion, the way this work has consumed my life, and made normal relationships nearly impossible, all of it came with costs. No, I said finally. I have grief. I have fear. I have moments of doubt. But I do not regret fighting back against the people who did this. I do not regret trying to make their deaths mean something. He nodded slowly. I feel the same way. Sometimes I think I should have pushed harder during the original investigation, should have seen the larger patterns earlier, but we did the best we could with what we knew, and we have never stopped trying to find the complete truth. The complete truth. That remains elusive. We know much more than we did 5 years ago. The networks involved, some of the individuals who ordered the massacre, the geopolitical and economic interests at play, but the highest levels of responsibility remain shrouded. The people who made the phone calls, who transferred the money, who gave the final orders, they continue to operate freely, protected by wealth, power, and connections that span continents. This incompleteness frustrates me. I want clear villains, satisfying conclusions, justice that feels proportional to the crime. But I have learned that real justice is messier, more partial, more ongoing than the justice we see in films or read in books. Real justice is incremental victories, small exposures of truth, gradual pressure on systems that resist accountability. The flash drive that Mariam Sankara was carrying that night was never found. We assume it was taken by whoever orchestrated the massacre, its contents destroyed or buried deeper than the bodies under the acacia trees. But Umaru had backup copies of much of her research, and over the years, we have reconstructed and expanded upon her work. In a sense, her investigation never ended. It simply continued through different hands, different voices. I have become something I never imagined I would be. A public figure, a symbol. People recognize me on the streets of Ouagadougou now. Some stop to express support. Others avoid eye contact, uncomfortable with the reminder of tragedy and corruption. I have given dozens of interviews, participated in documentary films, testified before international bodies. The shy, ordinary bus driver who simply wanted to do his job and support his family has become someone else entirely. My family has struggled with this transformation. My mother worries constantly about my safety. My siblings cannot fully understand why I continue to put myself at risk. Friends from my previous life have drifted away, unable to relate to what I have become. But I have gained a new family, the other survivors, activists, investigators who fight these same battles. We understand each other in ways that people outside this work cannot. Last month marked another milestone. The first person directly connected to ordering the bus massacre was arrested, not in Burkina Faso, but in France, where he had fled and where our international partners had built a case strong enough for prosecution. He is a mid-level facilitator, not the ultimate authority. But his arrest represents progress. His trial may reveal more, may pull other threads that lead higher up the chain of command. When I heard the news, I felt something I had not felt in 5 years. A small measure of peace, not closure, because this story has no clean ending, not forgetting, because the 42 are always with me. But peace in knowing that the work matters, that persistence can yield results, that justice, and however delayed and incomplete, is possible. I returned to the memorial that evening and stood before the monument as the sun set over the savannah. The names seemed to glow in the golden light: Mariam Sankara, Aminata Diallo, Kofi Ouédraogo, and 39 others. 42 lives, 42 stories cut short, 42 reasons to keep fighting. We got one of them, I said aloud to the empty air, to the spirits of the dead, to the memory of that terrible night. It is not enough, but it is something, and we will keep going. I promise you that we will keep going. The wind moved through the acacia trees, and for a moment I could almost believe they heard me. That somewhere beyond death and justice and the complications of this broken world, they knew that their deaths had not been forgotten, that people still fought in their names, that the empty bus that arrived at dawn 5 years ago had sparked something that continued to burn. I am Ibrahim Traoré. I survived when 42 others did not, and every day I try to make that survival worthy of their memory. It is the only way I know to live with what happened. It is the only way I can face each new dawn and find meaning in still being here. The work continues. The fight goes on. The names remain carved in stone and burned into my heart, and I remain witness, survivor, activist, carrying their stories forward into whatever future we can build from the ashes of that terrible past. This is my life now. This is my purpose. This is how an empty bus becomes a movement, how tragedy becomes transformation, how the dead speak through the living. And I will keep speaking for them until the day I join them in silence.